Our series of The Women Who continues with The Women Who Walked Away. Today, we're thrilled to have the first First Nations woman to sit in the BC Legislature and at the cabinet table. Melanie Mark is with us. Melanie spent 7 years in the BC government before deciding to leave and step down from her role as minister. In her resignation speech, she referred to the legislature as a torture chamber. Here to tell us why is Melanie Mark. Hi, Melanie. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, awesome to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, we have been doing this 3-part series. So we had the women who ran, the women who lost, and now the women who walked away. And this is one that Amanda and I have really been looking forward to because getting into politics is such a hard thing to do. And then staying in politics is such a hard thing to do. But for me, I always think if I was ever in a position where I was elected and I decided to walk away, what would it take for me to get there? And so we are thrilled to talk to you about your experience. But we want to start and talk about your whole story because you didn't just resign from cabinet. You were elected, you got involved in politics. How does your story start? Where did you come from? Who are you?
Wow, such a big question. I feel like I've had such a big life. And so when people ask me those questions, I feel like I've been honored with so many experiences, some that were really awful and traumatic, and others that were huge blessings. So I've had quite the journey. But before I start, I just want to acknowledge I'm participating via Zoom or technology from the traditional territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. I live in Burnaby, and it's great to be here with you. I think the first response I'd say is, as a First Nations person, I was born into politics. The Indian Act is the oldest piece of legislation in Canada. We have to remind ourselves of that. Governments, going back to our initial history through colonization, made it political for Indigenous people in this country. Politics around our land, our children, right? We can talk a lot about residential schools, fighting for rights and title. All of those things encompass my DNA. And so I was born into politics. One of the first things that you access as an Indian under the Indian Act is our status cards. And that status card informs our rights and title and our benefits. So I was born into politics. But as a First Nations person, I'm also a part of the statistics of people that live urban. We don't live in our traditional territory. I don't live in the Nass Valley. I don't live in Hazelton. I was born at Vancouver General Hospital in 1975 in East Van with a single mom. And, my experience here is very similar to a lot of people that are Indigenous that live in the city. It's called like the urban reds, so to speak. But my life is also characterized by a lot of statistics that people learn about or hear about with First Nations. I grew up in poverty. I grew up in social housing. I grew up with parents that struggled with addiction. I grew up with a lot of trauma. I grew up with poverty that didn't allow me the things that people take for granted, like having a car or having food security or having books in my home. So my life really was faced with a lot of adversity from the very, very early ages. The most traumatic thing that I experienced was when I was 12, and my brother was tragically killed by a semi-trailer. We were at the PNE. We're enjoying like the best day ever in the summer. We have this awesome day at New Brighton Park. And my brother's riding his bike before they built the tunnel at Hastings and Cassiar. And he was killed by a semi-trailer. Now, for any of your viewers or listeners, that's a very tragic thing to witness when you're 12 years old. And you're with your mom and your brother. And there's no talk at that time, right, about mental health or trauma or what you do. And my mom struggled. She had a broken heart. And that broken heart meant that I had to carry the weight at home to look after my siblings and look after the household and go to school. So when I look back at my life, it's remarkable that I survived a lot of that and that I actually made it to school. I'm going to tell you, I was not a straight A student. I was in trouble all the time. all the time, for, challenging authority, questioning, systems and justice. I loved Law 12. So, school was really, really challenging for me. But fast forward, and I'm skipping a little bit.
Yep.
It wasn't too long ago that a report was made from the Auditor General's office saying that we have a culture of low expectations for Indigenous people in this province, right? Indigenous kids are not making it across the finish line at the rates of non-Indigenous students. So again, for your listeners, thinking about the adversity that I went through going to 6 different high schools with C minuses, and really struggling to make it through school, but it was sport that kept me engaged. I went to school for PE, and I went to school to see my friends. So fast forward, you talked about politics. I became the Minister for Advanced Education, Skills and Training.
Right. Yeah.
And then fast forward to the global pandemic, and I become the Minister for Sport. So you can imagine how remarkable my life has felt as someone who experienced a pretty rough upbringing to later become an advocate for the province.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. That was like chill inducing.
I had so many questions, but
I know I have so many questions too.
Because I think people look and they think, wow, like, you have all this power and this privilege and you've had this incredible life, without realizing that it was a struggle. And it took a lot of grit and determination to kind of keep clawing my way through the day to figure out, like, not only surviving, but what I later started calling as a campaign working with kids in care, we need to move to people thriving, right?
Yeah.
Not surviving, but thriving. How do we get to a place where people are thriving and living their best selves? So that's what made politics remarkable. I had the opportunity to be an advocate and make conditions better for people in so many aspects of higher education. And then, of course, in my time as the Minister for Tourism, Arts, Culture, and Sport.
I'm curious, and we've asked this question many times before, because I think that in many cases, women have talked to us about the fact that they either dreamed of, these leadership roles, and then many have told us, no, it sort of accidentally fell in my lap. So I'm curious of the, high school Melanie, who was challenging authority, to eventually becoming, cabinet minister. At what juncture were you like, the stream that's going to be interesting for me, politics?
Well, I'll tell you, I have a degree in political science, and I had no desire to
ever become
ever. My aspirations were never to be a politician, but I will say I've always been an advocate. I don't care if I was defending kids that were being bullied in school, and this is what I mean by being in trouble. I remember people picking on the fat kid or the ugly kid, and that's how people, kids are mean, right? And I'd just show up and say, hey, now it's 4 against 2. Bring it on. I've always been a defender. And I think in my heart, I've always been a rights defender, someone who really feels strongly about human rights, the principles of fairness. I'm a Libra, if you haven't guessed so far. And someone who just always felt that, there's a place for underdogs. I've been the underdog my entire life. All of my favorite movies are about the underdogs. And so was I groomed for leadership? I think I have an inherent skill to be an advocate and the courage to speak up. But I'll tell you, in grade 11, and I had to public speak, I had so many nerves. My mouth went dry. I couldn't, it was really, really terrifying to do the public speaking. But again, going back to school and that young Melanie, my first kind of protest, or skipping out of school to go to a march was for women's rights. In grade 12, I became the girls' sports rep. No aspirations for political office, but, it started naturally by someone who said, hey, girls can play rugby too. Why is there only a boys' rugby team? Why can't there be a girls' rugby team? So, of course, I created the first girls' rugby team when I graduated from ladies
Of
to
course.
secondary. So no, I was not, I had no aspirations. I didn't feel a sense of entitlement. I think some people do feel a sense of entitlement, like it's
Mhm.
this is their aspiration and therefore they should have a seat. But whether they're good advocates or not,
Hmm.
I'm not gonna, I don't want to be too critical here, but I don't think everyone equally goes to work with the same sense of um, outspokenness that I
Mhm.
think the public is looking for, which is
Mhm.
why on my LinkedIn or my other profiles, I say that I'm an outspoken matriarch. Because
Hmm.
I think, again, the public is looking for us to really challenge systems and speak up and be courageous and be bold.
So, talk to me about the decision to put your name on a ballot, because you said that you were born into politics, and I love that line. But you had to align with a political party and then sign up to actually run for that political party. What was your decision to join the NDP like, and then obviously to put your name on that ballot?
So I came to politics by a different route than is traditional. It was quite unconventional. I worked for the government. I was an advocate with the Representative for Children and Youth, which is an independent office of the
Right.
legislature. So we oversaw government. And because we were independent, I've been fairly groomed or mentored to be nonpartisan. That doesn't mean that I don't have my partisanship, but over the course of my career, I wasn't really allowed to be partisan.
Right.
I've always voted, and I've always voted NDP. And part of that is because of my grandparents. My grandfather said the NDP had the backs of the natives at a time when it wasn't politically correct. Right now, we've got the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People.
Right.
But let's not forget that the BC Liberals challenged, the Niska Treaty and, all the politics around referendum. There are political parties that have gone to task against rights recognition for First Nations people. And the NDP have had the backs of First Nations back to when my grandparents were young. So that is my political leaning. Fast forward to your question about putting my name on a ballot. I met Mabel Elmore. I was at a youth event. She was speaking about martial arts. I used to train in Muay Thai kickboxing and jiu-jitsu. And I'm like, who is this lady? You're talking to youth and you're talking about martial arts? Like, I want to get to know you.
That's so funny.
And of course, I had just left with the Representative for Children and Youth. It was a sliding door moment. Wasn't sure where my next journey was going to go. Mabel Elmore was running for the nomination against Jenny Kwan for Van East after Libby Davies announced her retirement.
Right.
And I had asked Mabel Elmore, hey, how did you get involved in politics? She was mentoring me and introducing me to campaigning and all of those pieces. She didn't win the nomination. Jenny Kwan did. Mabel Elmore said, hey, do you want to run to be the MLA for Vancouver Mount Pleasant?
Wow.
That was it.
And that was it.
And I will tell your listeners, it takes women typically about 3 years for them to decide to put their name forward.
Yep.
Yeah.
I had like 30 minutes.
Oh my God. And you did it.
In 2015 to put my name forward. So no political experience, never ran a campaign in my life. It was absolutely just incredible. So I thank Mabel for inviting me to be involved in the movement. And I think because I didn't know what I was walking into, I put my name forward. Had I known what I was walking into, I'm not sure I would have signed up for the job. And I say that with all due respect. MLAs are gone from their homes almost 18 weeks out of the year.
Yeah.
Right? There's a huge sacrifice on your family, and it took its toll on my family. I made those remarks clear in the House. It was the best thing that I've ever done. I will not dispute that. Being an MLA was absolutely incredible. But had I known everything that I was walking into, I'm not sure I would have made the same decision, but the Creator made that decision for me.
Before we talk about your resignation, and some of the reasons why you may not do it again if you had a do-over. What was great about it? What was fantastic? What was the thing that you take with you as, I'm so glad I had that job?
Oh my goodness. So there's a lot there. The one thing I'll say is when Jody Wickens and I got elected together in a by-election, that created a sisterhood. I really loved Jody. We had that moment together with John Horgan. It was one of the best moments of my life. We brought the drum into the legislature for the first time. And if you haven't seen it, I encourage your listeners and viewers to witness. That moment was historic because it reminded British Columbians that regardless of all of the adversity that we as First Nations have endured, we're still here. And we're here with the same aspirations that other people have in their lives, to support their family, to have healthy communities, all of those things. I won't go down the list. But becoming an MLA gave me that opportunity to be an advocate on a grander stage. So I'll show this pin for you. Just over 100 women in all of BC's history have ever received this pin, this MLA pin. Over 1,200 MLAs have been elected in all of BC's history.
Wow.
So you can, it's just amazing, right? To have that as a part of what I get to share with my grandchildren. I always said this publicly. I wish my grandparents were there for that moment to witness how far their granddaughter has come. And I worked so hard in my life, right? Really, really worked hard to make change. So I can list off 7 years of advocating for my constituents and being able to pick up the phone and use my political weight to say, hi, I'm calling on behalf of my constituent who really needs housing right now, and to improve their lives. We don't have enough time to talk about how many lives I was able to improve. And what an honor, right? Such an honor to be able to go in there and use your political acumen, and not your partisanship, but you're a politician. You're an elected official.
Right.
And you're using your voice to make things better. That I miss for sure. I miss the community events, all of those pieces, the grassroots components of it, being creative, dealing with really aggressive, ambitious mandate letters from Premier John Horgan. I went to task with all of my heart, and I gave it all of my heart. And there's so many things that I cherish, and I have no regrets whatsoever. But I will also say my diagnosis of ADHD last year also illuminated why I had struggles in my life. I move at this pace. And my brother had said, politics is going to be hard for you because it's slow and can be frustrating. It's slow. It takes a lot to get things done. You will be frustrated. And so I look back and really celebrate all of the things that I was able to do because of my ADHD and my energy and my ambition. My sense of social justice, all of that is great, but I probably made it really hard for people to work with me and keep up this pace, or they didn't share probably the same level of duty that I had to carry, to be an advocate for people like myself and others that really needed a voice in that legislature that was going to fight as hard as they could.
We've been really lucky to talk to a lot of women that have held titles of first. And you will remain the first and only woman appointed to First Nations women appointed to cabinet in British Columbia. I watched your swearing in ceremony as research for our conversation, and I got goosebumps. What an incredible moment. How incredible that it took this long. From your perspective, when you reflect on that moment, how are you feeling?
Oh, well, I mean, I'm an emotional person by nature. I'm a very visceral person.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you've ever had the privilege to listen to the drum, you can see behind me, I'm surrounded by drums. The
Yeah.
drum is the heartbeat of the people. And to be standing there with my grandmother's regalia that the matriarch of our family gifted me to protect me as an MLA, and my grandmother's pendant that I wore as a shield also to protect me in public life. It was a profound moment, and one that is in our history books forever.
Yeah.
As the first. And I take great pride in that, but I think of my grandparents and I honor their struggle with residential school, their struggle to belong and have a sense of community in this province with all of the racism that they endured in their life. And it's not over. The struggle's real, still here. But to that question of like, what did that moment mean? It meant a sense of hope, I think, for me, a sense of hope that the future will be brighter for my kids, for our province, to really embrace Indigenous people as for who we are. Proud. We are proud of our culture.
Yeah.
We're proud of our identity, and we're not going to let anyone wipe that away.
You are so moving when you speak. And one of the things that I will share with you from my perspective is listening to you, and I've worked with a lot of politicians over the last 20 years. And you can sense when someone is there for the right reasons. You know, you can sense when there's they're guided by a deep sense of purpose. And I can feel that just like emanating off of you, everything you're saying. So it strikes me as we're going to turn the conversation now to your decision to step away. And it's all the more heartbreaking, I think, because you can hear all of those reasons why you were there in the first place, the things that guided you, the advocacy, like the sense of purpose, the things that we all hope our elected officials come to office with.
Yeah.
Something forced you to step away. Can you tell us a little bit about that time? What happened?
Yeah, so giving you some insights as a First Nations person, our culture, what family is everything to me. I think some people say that, but I don't think they mean it, to be transparent, right? I think some people just don't have that same sense of duty, right, to be there for their family. And we also have to acknowledge many of us or some of us are single parents in this province, in this country. The hustle's real. And so being a mom, being an MLA, and being a minister was a very, very demanding lifestyle for 7 or 8 years. Some of us got divorced in the middle of COVID. The struggles were real, right? Public life is hard for an average person. But you touched on something, Amanda. I have a big heart and I have a visceral heart. Like I really feel people's struggles and pain and hopes and dreams. And then I'm a problem solver. I want to fix it. I want to do what I can. In my speech, I said, I came here to do as much damage as I can. And I did. I have so many legacies, housing. Like I really don't want to take the space to say how much I was able to accomplish through the privilege that John gave me to be a minister. But when the discovery came to our family about ADHD, I needed to hit pause. I needed to stop and say, like, I really need to be present. I'm not going to have this chaotic, hectic, stressful, demanding lifestyle of 18-hour days and briefings, the size of bricks. It was just my kids spent their childhood looking at their mom reading briefing binders at the kitchen table day after day after day, and then being gone 18 weeks out of the year. You can imagine, which I'm really trying to paint the picture. Yeah. People say that public life is, there's a lot of sacrifice, but I don't know if people really dive down to how much sacrifice without starting to paint this picture that you're complaining. I'm not complaining. I'm just laying out literal facts. And I've also said that my children have one chance at a childhood, and I'm going to be there for them so that they have thriving conditions. Not surviving conditions, but mom's going to be there, and we're going to get things sorted out. So the ADHD was a big reason why I left. And you'd asked or alluded to, whether I run again, who knows? I may very well get back into public office. I think there is such MLAs and MPs, all levels of government, Indigenous politics. We need people in public office to fight.
Yes.
But I was not going to sacrifice my kids' childhoods. They sacrificed enough while I was an MLA and while I was a minister.
So, and here is I know, Rachel, you have 10 million. I just have one little add-on question.
Please.
One little add-on and then
get in there.
But like, here lies the conundrum, right? Because here is this passionate advocate, this woman who's there for the right reasons, who clearly has a limitless heart for this. And you're a mom. And you have limitless heart to be a mom. And I think this, this we hear over and over again, this decision, this like inflection point where it's like, how can you be both? Can you be both things? And this is the part that I always question about, and I'm curious, and I want you to just spend a moment more on that, because is it possible to do this job well and to be a mom and to do all the things, all the balls that we're trying to hold in the air? Is it possible? And is that why in 2024 we still have so few women putting their hands up for the job?
Well, I think anything's possible, and I'm also an example of someone who was able to do it. I was able to do my job, and there were lots of really good days. Yeah. But things come at a cost, and you have to make a choice. And my kids don't get their childhood back, and I'm their CEO, right? I'm their CEO. I have a duty. That's my mandate, right?
I love that.
But let's talk about gender politics. Let's talk about, and again, this isn't to this. There's no shaming here. Let's just talk about facts. And we don't talk enough publicly about how much unpaid domestic work women still do. Yeah. We also don't talk enough about how much mansplaining women have to deal with at whatever level of the executive table. It's exhausting. Leadership, right? Leadership for women is exhausting because we're always having to explain or defend why we have a right to have a seat at the table, right? That's a separate advocacy mandate, just defending why we're here, why we're the right person for the job. So those politics, in 2024, we've come a long way, but we've got a long way to go, right? I think there's always people that really want to hold the glass half full, everything's positive, and I think we have made some inroads. But I have colleagues on both sides of the house that I've worked with that have faced divorce. I have colleagues on both sides of the house that have no idea what it means to go home and make dinner, do the laundry, bake the cupcakes for the fundraiser, like all of those extra pink jobs, unpaid, come at a toll, right? It's a job. It's unpaid labor, which means that you can't show up to other responsibilities in your CEO role. I hope I'm kind of answering your question, but I think
you are.
There's just extra responsibilities that some people carry, and I think that there's still a shame in our society about single parents. I don't think anyone signs up to be a single parent. I don't think anyone signs up to be a divorced parent. Families come in all shapes and sizes these days, and let's be honest about what that looks like. For our communities and our families, right? The idea of it takes a community to raise a child. You can imagine what my household looked like before I had to go to Victoria, right? Meal planning, the laundry, making sure the agendas are done. You don't even want to look at my calendar. The fact that I managed to make all these happen, yes, of course, but it meant that I couldn't do a whole bunch of other things in my life.
For sure.
Right? So I hope I hope I'm answering your question, Amanda.
You did
And
perfectly.
boy, are you speaking to us. Amanda and I both have young children, the 5 kids between us. So we feel it, and we're not ministers on top of it. So absolutely, that was very dead on to our experience. I want to read you a line after you resigned. So many people probably have heard about your resignation speech. You gave a very impassioned speech in the legislature, where you referred to the legislature as a you said it feels like a torture chamber. And I think that line was really front page news, but I think that your speech overall went even deeper and really outlined your experience and some of the challenges that you have. But afterwards, you were interviewed by the media and you said, I was accused of deleting emails. I was accused of ruining the cruise ship industry. Even though I'm not responsible for the federal mandates of our ports, I was accused of ruining the Royal BC Museum. And all of that takes a toll. Can you tell us about that?
Well, what I'll tell you, I mean, I will eventually write my book once my daughters are older. There are some things that I have to kind of keep close at the moment, and that's not to imply that there's, the tell-all is to be gossip. It's to reveal to people weeks on end that I was attacked for the Royal BC Museum.
Which, for our listeners, I'm just for context, you had announced a $1 billion investment in
789 million is not
789 million. Sorry, investment into rebuilding the Royal BC Museum in Victoria, and there was a huge pushback from the opposition on that file.
Yeah. So thanks for the context. So this is where I get a little bit. You can start to hear my tone being a little bit, I wouldn't say defensive, but what you'll hear me saying is like, let's get our facts straight. So I had a mandate from the Premier. Mandate letters are public knowledge that I had a mandate to modernize the museum. The museum has been neglected for years. It's been on the books as a capital project that should have been updated. And in order to update a building, you have to look at, hey, do we refurbish a building? Do we look at a new site? What would a new build look like? If we're going to build, what does that new build look like in terms of capacity? So we did a business case, made the announcement, John Horgan and I thought it was a great day to say to British Columbians that we're going to have a state-of-the-art museum to protect our archives and our history, the Douglas Treaties, Emily Carr's painting, you name it. And we got, the opposition went to town. The opposition's job is to go to town. That is their job. Their job is to question public money, what's the use, etc. And we gave them the facts. We gave them the rationale. The public service did their work to inform British Columbians what's the best of the 5 options. But in the end, Premier John Horgan said that we would pull back on the project and we would do more public engagement. And that was hard for me personally. It was hard for me personally because I'd spent the years that I had done, not to mention previous ministers, looking at how to modernize the museum, all through public knowledge, all through the estimate processes. And so for the opposition to show up as though this was some big secret that the NDP was doing with their boondoggle of announcement to spend public money to protect the People's Museum was absolutely ludicrous. And you're hearing the passion in my voice that, what I said to Kevin Falcon was like, what do you have against protecting our history? Or better yet, if something happens to our history, then who's to blame? So you're hearing an important lesson in politics. You can't win.
Yeah.
And so to the media, that was hard. The cruise ship industry, not to be defensive, quote unquote, but the opposition went to town about what am I going to do to protect the cruise ship industry? Well, guess what? And I said it in question period. I'm not responsible for federal legislation. And the fact that you have to defend an MP's job when you're a minister for the province just seemed like, yes, I get the politics, but it's let's stick to the program of what my real mandate was. And I did save the cruise ship industry. I did save a lot of industries during the middle of a global pandemic, being their advocate. But I think what I said to close this piece around the toll of politics and the torture chamber, I think going to work every single day being the villain as though you're an incompetent idiot, or better yet, a First Nations woman who's basically stupid, that character assassination takes its toll when you're sitting there watching the news with your kids. And what they saw their mom do was read binders, try to make informed decisions, try to be an advocate for the people, try to make best interests on behalf of British Columbians and taxpayers through processes that are way broader than Melanie Mark just signing off on things. And for them to see their mom characterized as just an idiot, I think took its toll.
For sure. For sure. And this is the other thing that we hear all the time. We've talked a lot about on this podcast, this idea of the toxic environment that we're in anyway, when it comes to politics and social media and how we respond to each other and how, seemingly low that bar has been set now. And we talk all the time about the disservice that it does to women in particular who are so turned off by the vile rhetoric that is tossed between parties, the partisan rhetoric, that they're not just turned off, but they tune out. And when we tune out, we really lose the opportunity to be engaged at a level that we're supposed to be engaged in, that we need to be engaged in. So I guess my question is, did you feel that there was, or is your impression of politics in general right now that it is toxic, or do you feel like, that's social media and we need to park that and we need to rise above it? Like, I'm curious where you kind of sit on that conversation around the language that's being used right now.
Such a huge question. There are so many elements to responding, right? I mean, first of all, I think social media. So let's just pause for a second. The way and how elected officials, came into these institutions and the staff that they have to support them and all of those pieces were created at a moment in time. And let's not forget those conditions were made to be comfortable for men and white men back in the day, right? So fast forward and you start to include people with diversity and all those pieces. We haven't caught up with what that looks like in order to make it safe conditions. I mean, I think the media, the women some of the media women were from the press gallery were chastised because they weren't wearing long sleeve shirts or sweaters. I mean, our dress code is chastised. It's incredible. Point being, there's so much public scrutiny over politicians, and the access is not a two-way street. So the torture chamber for me is like, I can dish it and take it. But in political life, you're supposed to just take it. And the way I grew up in East Van. I played rugby. I trained in martial arts. You can see a rugby ball behind me. I can dish it and take it.
Right.
But politics and the culture of politics says, well, take the high road. It just goes with a job. Sexual harassment shouldn't go with your job. Being demeaning, and I'm not talking, the torture chamber is not from the peanut gallery or the press gallery or the opposition. It's from constituents. It's from people. It's from every access point that people have. For us to be criticized every single day with things that are often not factual. So I mentioned earlier, like, I have no problem. Call me out if I'm a liar. Call me out if my math was wrong. But to defend the facts, you can't get into this online debate with keyboard warriors because it's a part of your job. So, I know people that don't go on social media. That's a way that they've been able to kind of maintain keeping their mental health and doing the job. But it's such a distraction if you're following, right? It's such a huge job as it is to be an MLA and a minister. And then you've got the keyboard warriors that are absolutely vile, if not vicious, if not a real threat to your life.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I hope I'm answering your question. I'm not trying to tell people don't run, you shouldn't run.
No.
I said 20 minutes ago, I think it was one of the best things I've ever done in my life.
Yeah.
But it came at a cost. It came at
Yeah.
I think one of the most looked up Google searches is Melanie Mark's husband.
Really?
Yeah, really. What do people care about? Like, it's the stupidest
That's
thing
crazy.
that people take an
Wow.
interest in. I know. It sounds
bothers
absurd,
me.
but all these little factoids I'm sharing with you is like there's some really awesome, remarkable things that you can do, but there's also some really awful things that you have to endure. And together, I was kind of smirking when you made your remarks, Rachel, when I gave my last speech in the House. I had gone over this speech for weeks, right? This was a very carefully crafted speech, but I came up with torture chamber like an hour before.
Wow. Really?
Because it's called the chamber, right? When you go into the chamber.
Right. Got it.
But the chambers people think is just question period without people acknowledging like the Legislative Assembly is its own chamber. Right? And there's a culture that needs to change overall in the way we do business over there. And I don't think they were ready for me.
So I think I heard that after you resigned, you did your speech. David Eby said to the media, if she has changes to suggest, we will look at them. And I wonder, are there changes at the tip of your tongue that you can say, this needs to be done, this needs to be better? Is there anything that you would like, you're nodding, like for to be implemented?
Yeah, well,
I'm putting on the spot a little bit here.
It's okay, because I think any job, especially at that level, like an executive level job position that people have, especially when you go into cabinet, MLAs have their orientation packages and cabinet has their orientation packages. And a lot of the emphasis is like your oath of office and, swearing your decorum, conflict of interest, all of those pieces. But there's little that talks about cultural competency. One of the opposition MLAs once asked me, why don't I speak my language? It's a shame that you don't. First of all, she said, do you speak your language? And I said, no. And she goes, why? And I said, well, it was beaten out of my grandparents in residential school.
Yeah.
Well, that's too bad. Like, she just had no cultural competency. And it was so offensive. But I'm like, you're a leader.
Yeah.
You should know better. And you leaned on the only First Nations woman to ever hold a seat in here. And I've got to educate you on our history. We've got a long way to go. So I think you can have baseline training that informs people about our history on traditional First Nations land, unceded land. Like that's the baseline. I think you would do that in any other country to understand where you come from. And I think that would show some respect. It would change, I hope, a little bit of respect for how far we have come as First Nations people in this province. So I think that's one thing. There's so many other things that you can list off around workspace, workplace kind of environment. I have no problem working 18-hour days if I'm going to get an outcome.
Right.
But there are other things over there that are a complete waste of time. No offense, but like, it's kind of churning wheels in session. And I think there's a culture, some people that want to hold on to the past of being in those chambers for debate. And debate's important. But if debate isn't going to change outcomes, then what's the point?
Yeah. And did anyone ever follow up with you and say, what can we change after you left?
There was a parliamentary committee struck. A lawyer reached out to me and asked me all of these re-traumatizing questions about this and that. What was it like for you? I mean, the challenge is if you're the only, let's go back to this. Let's make an analogy and think of the States. let's say we asked like a Black American person, like the only one that's ever been elected in the United States of America, to go participate in some committee to express how they were treated,
right,
in a colonial institution.
yeah,
There was not. I had to really advocate for my safety, right? To be able to explain, like, this isn't how I felt just as a First Nations person. This is how I felt as a woman. This is how I felt as a mother. This is how I felt as someone who was trying to do my job and treated like a complete idiot half the time. After a while, like, it's not the decorum. The decorum is just below the belt sometimes.
yeah,
And I think the speaker, especially in the chamber, has the mandate to say, hey, that's off limits. The minister doesn't have to answer the question that is the responsibility of an MP. Those were things that, for me particularly, would have been helpful. Or to say, like, hey, the minister answered that question. We're not going over that again. Instead of it being a free for all for the opposition to make you look like an idiot.
right.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And women should wear, people, I don't care who it is, like this idea of decorum and what you wear to work. I mean, I think you should dress professionally.
Yeah.
Well, we had the right to bear arms in the legislature, where they weren't allowed to wear. Women were not allowed to wear sleeveless dresses until a few years ago, which is crazy.
Exactly.
Crazy. Okay,
So, yes,
Amanda?
some changes have been made, and I'm glad that to your point about being the first, it's not always easy because I had to create a path in the dark, right? But now there's a path, and I left enough medicine, and I left enough clues for people to be able to show up in a different way. I still have colleagues to this day that are like, we miss you, Melanie. We miss you because I stood up and I said the things that were near and dear to my heart, or what was near and dear to people that demanded of me to be their voice.
What's next for Melanie Mark?
Well, I think there's a saying, I'm just getting started.
Yeah.
I've had an incredible life, and I'm only 48. So, that was a chapter that was awesome. And being an advocate for children and youth was also awesome. And so now I'm going into more of the environmental and entrepreneurial space. So I'm really passionate about the clean tech sector, and doing some work in the recycling electric battery space.
Oh, that's awesome.
Which,
Wow.
I know. People are like, why would you do that? And I'm like, well, because it solves the triple word score for me. It addresses environmental, economic, and social issues that are near and dear to my heart. My kids are very passionate about it. We drive an electric vehicle, and I just want to be an advocate in a different way, but in the same way. So I'm using all the skills that I learned in politics and just transferring them into the entrepreneurial space, and trying to make a difference for Mother Earth, who really needs us to be on her side right now.
Yep. As my daughter says, gas is making the trees sick. So she'll be happy to. She's 3 years old and she knows that. So she will be happy to hear that you're doing that. But we will be happy to watch everything that you're going to accomplish, and potentially even maybe someday back to public life, because you are such a fierce champion of the issues and the causes that you care about. And we are so privileged, really, to have you with us and to tell your story. And really, we could sit here for another couple hours and pick your brain on so many things. So hopefully you will come back and continue the conversation with us as you continue your work. But we want to thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. And if I can just leave with, a few insights, I would do it again. I would do it again. I have no regrets in my life because this is where I needed to be, and you can't turn back time. But I also believe in, I think your earlier remarks were about leaving and walking away. And I challenge people to look at it more positively, right? Standing up for yourself is not walking away or giving up. It's the opposite. And I think we don't honor enough of that in our lives to really stand up for yourself, to stand up for what you're not going to put up with anymore. I gave a speech last year, and I've really spoken publicly about paddle together. We've got to paddle together. There's so much work we need to do. We've got to collaborate, paddle together, which is fantastic if you have the right people in your canoe. Mm-hmm. But over the course of my life, I've also learned I haven't had the best company in my canoe. They've held me back from what I believe in or what I want to achieve. And so don't be afraid to throw people out of your canoe. To move forward on the things that you need to do. So my point is we need women at all executive tables, people like me, like yourselves, people with all different backgrounds, taking up space to fight for change and be in the company of people that are going to warrior up with you, that are going to lean in and do that work with you. That's where I'm at right now. I'm just in a space where I feel like I belong, as an entrepreneur, to be fighting and doing the same advocacy just without the politics.
Melanie Mark, you are one of my favorite guests that we've had. Mm-hmm. You make me, I swear, you make me want to get up and go do something big right now.
Right? You're like, that's it.
Yeah.
Do a makeover.
That was amazing.
Amazing.
Well, we just thank you. Take stock, right? Time is your currency. You get one life. Be surrounded by people that lift you up, right? And it's that coaching mentality. You can do anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You can do anything. It's a good place to leave it.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Melanie Mark. We will definitely have you back. And to everyone listening, we'll be right back.